Sorry, it's already started. The timer didn't work. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us at this Your Overseas Home webinar. My name is Christopher Nye, Senior Editor at Your Overseas Home. Lovely to see you, whether with us live or on demand. Now, today we're chatting with both Joana Nete Mestre and Sarah Carvalho de Oliveira from Matt Law. I hope I said those right. About the 90-day rule and visas when buying in Portugal. And we're bang up to date with the new one from this week as well. Please type your questions into the questions tab on the right-hand side of your screen, although we may well answer them in the presentation anyway. And if you need a reminder or want to share this with family or friends, a replay is on the Your Overseas Home website. Now, Joana and Sarah, it'd be great if you could please start by giving us a summary of who you are and how Matt Law can help our viewers today.
Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I'm a lawyer and a partner at Matt Law. We are a law firm focused in real estate investment and relocation, basically immigration and tax law here in Portugal. Today we're going to briefly explain, giving you some highlights on the residency and visa process here in Portugal. And of course, this is what we do. We have assisted many clients from all over the world coming to our country, investing here and moving to Portugal, which is in particular the subject of this webinar. I will start, if Chris, if you mind starting our presentation, maybe we could go ahead.
Okay.
Just a brief overview of what we would like to share with you today. We would very much welcome your questions at the end of the presentation, and we will also leave you our contact details should you need any specific assistance. A residence in Portugal, a very brief overview that I will do. Then we will go through the visa and residence permits process. We will go in a bit more detail explaining what are the types of visa that third countries nationals can apply. Then once a visa is obtained, how the residence process works. Some questions that many of our clients have shared with us. A very specific summary on the Portuguese Golden Visa program, which has some particularities different than the other visa. And then at last, we will very much welcome your questions and a very interesting discussion with our audience. So, residence in Portugal, this is very important to start, which is the difference between applicants coming from EU member states and applicants coming from third countries, so countries outside the EU, including namely UK, US, Canada, South Africa, China. The process of residency is very, very different. For EU nationals, the process can be just as simple as coming to Portugal, and under the freedom of establishment and movement within the EU, you can get a very simple residence certificate and start your relocation from there. You don't need a visa. For all the other nationals from third countries, the process can be quite a bit more complex, and that's what we're going to focus today. So the residence process for third countries nationals. In this case, you will always need a residence visa. Well, not always, as we will explain. A residence visa granted from your country of current residency from a Portuguese embassy or consulate to come to Portugal. Then get a proper residence permit already in Portugal. The relocation process has two main aspects that one should bear in mind. In one hand, we have all the immigration law applicable, which will, the rules that will apply to these visa and residence permit applications. And we also have the taxation, the implications in the applicant's taxation once coming to Portugal and moving here on a permanently basis. And we won't talk about the taxation side of the relocation process. It can be, it could be the subject of a different webinar. But I just wanted to give you this note in this initial overview. In terms of timelines and timings, Sarah won't go much for it, but it is very common, unfortunately, that the process lasts longer than initially expected or longer than the law foresees. So you'll find, many information online with deadlines that are not as accurate as they should be. The process timeline depends a lot on the entities involved and the country of origin and the embassy that is being responsible for the visa application. There are several visa categories, and I would like to give the stage to my colleague, Sarah. Sarah is an immigration lawyer at Matt Law, and she, much better than I, will continue the webinar and explain any queries you may have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joanna, and thank you everyone for being here with us today. As Joanna mentioned, I will start by explaining let's say the difference between visa and residence permit, because sometimes when our clients come to us, they usually have different difficulties in know the difference or what needs to be requested before or after. So the idea is when you come to Portugal as a third country, as Joanna explained, there is two moments in the residence process, which we will also go into further detail ahead. But essentially, you have to request a visa and then go for a residence permit. The visa is actually the document that will allow someone to come to Portugal, stay in the country for, let's say, a limited period of time in some types of visa, or to apply for a residence permit, which would be in the case of the residence visa. And this document, it will only be issued to third country nationals, because as Joanna explained, European Union nationals have, follow another different process and have a different type of document to enter the country. There are, as Joanna also explained, several types of visas in Portugal, and this will depend on your intended purpose in the country. Let's say studying or working, but we'll go ahead. I will show you all the types of visa that we have. This is usually requested outside of Portugal and not in the country. So if you want to start the residence process, you should do it in your country of residence or your country of origin. So it's always requested before the Portuguese embassy, consulate, or outsourcing entity that's working for one of these entities to issue the visas. The next step will be to obtain the residence permit, which is also issued only through third country nationals in following the visa, and to people that have the right to live in Portugal, meaning the visa holders. So once you have the visa, you'll go and request the residence permit. This will be the document that you'll use in Portugal as your ID document, so to identify yourself, but also it's the only document that will be fit to prove your legal residence in the country. There are two types of residence permits. The first one will be the temporary residence permit, which will be the first one that will be granted to you as a new resident in the country. And after 5 years of legal residence in the country, you can apply for a permanent residence permit. So during this period, the validity of the residence will differ from type of residence permit. So, and according to the intended purpose of stay, it will be given a specific type of residence permit, and therefore that will be that will have a specific validity. Also, in the end of the 5 years, let's say after 6 years of legally residing in Portugal, there is the possibility of requesting the Portuguese nationality, but this should be, of course, analyzed in a case-by-case basis, and of course it will be necessary to fulfill all the necessary requirements for that purpose. So within the visas, there are several types of visa, and just to make a quick differentiation between both, first you have two main types of visa, the Schengen visa and the national visa. Here we will focus much more on the national visas because these are the visas that are granted by Portuguese entities, and these are the ones that will grant you residence. So Schengen visa are always issued by any country in the Schengen area, so you can request it to any country, let's say, and it's just intended for short stays that are for less than 90 days. National visas will be issued by Portuguese authorities for short stays for very specific purposes and within 90 days and 1 year, and for long stays for more than 1 year. So the national visas will be the ones to look for if you want to, relocate to Portugal and stay here as a resident. As I was mentioning, the Schengen visa is issued by European Union member states, and the intended purposes are for airport transit, or short stays, let's say visits a family member, or just come for tourism purposes, but there are only stays. It only includes stays of less than 90 days within a 180 days period. I know this is something that a lot of people have questions about, the calculation of these 90 days, and we will address it ahead. But just to say that these ones are just for very, very short stays. And the application is always submitted in person in the consulate of any of the European Union member states. And this is the type of visa that I think that is most relevant here, because the idea of this webinar is to buy in Portugal and probably relocate. So the national visas are visas that are granted by Portuguese authorities. The Portuguese authority of excellence is in the Immigration and Borders Office, as Joanna mentioned, which we call CEF. You will hear about this a lot. And the national visas are intended for short stays for very specific purposes, as I mentioned, for between 90 days to a year, long stays for more than 1 year, and are regulated by the Portuguese law. So, and depending on the duration of your stay, you can choose between a temporary stay visa or a residence visa. The temporary stay visas are visas that are granted to applicants who wish to stay in Portugal between the 90 days and 1 year. So for not short stays as the Schengen visa, but not long stays of more than 1 year. So if you the visa will be valid for the duration of the visa, the period that you requested. So if you requested 6 months, the visa will be granted for 6 months and grants you multiple entries in Portugal, which means that you can enter several times in the country. This will mean, of course, that some types of visa don't have specific periods of duration, so you can choose up to 1 year. But there are other types of visa that actually have, like the study visa. It will be granted for the period of studies, so you cannot choose a higher period than the one of the studies. So, and this, of course, will depend in the case-by-case analysis that you should check which type of visa you want and for how long it's granted, and if you can be granted a period you are willing to apply for. And this is also a visa that these visas also should be granted by the Portuguese consulates and embassies, and these are the types of temporary stay visas that we have foreseen in the Portuguese law. So work investigation, studies, professional training, internship and volunteer work, health, youth mobility, pensioners and tourism, and religion. At the moment, this is what we have. We also have people that are applying for this visa need to be aware that it should also be made in person at these entities that I already mentioned, and that you should, of course, check which type of visa is applicable according to your intended stay and meet all the necessary legal requirements for that purpose. In the case of the residence visas, these are for people that are willing to stay in the country, live here, and for a long period of time, so more than 1 year. We have these types of visa. Maybe you may recognize a few of them. The D2 for work, and the most requested are like the family reunification, people living off their own income, the D7, and the golden visa. These are all residence visas. These are visas that are granted also by Portuguese consulates, embassies, and outsourcing entities, must be requested in person, and these are only they only allow you 2 entries in the country, and will be granted for a period of 4 months, during which you should have a meeting with CEF to grant you the residence permit, because the goal of requesting the residence visa is to obtain the residence permit. So usually this is done automatically, but it depends on the embassy. And we also, as Joanna also highlighted in the beginning, this is the period that is mentioned in the Portuguese law, but there are several problems with complying with the deadlines. So it may happen that the period of wait between having the visa and the residence permit can be longer than 4 months. So I already mentioned a few types.
Sorry, just apologize for the interruption. Just one clarification. You can see on the screen that we have included the golden visa as one of the categories of modalities of residence visa. Indeed, the golden visa is so-called, is a visa for investors. However, different from the other visas, this is not required in the country of origin. So it is a more expedited way of getting residence in Portugal. However, the timelines that should be honored by the Portuguese Foreigners and Borders Office, the CEF, at the moment are not the best. So it's becoming less attractive because it should be a more expedited way. We hope this will get better in the coming months, as they are now getting more staff and trying to recover the delays caused by the pandemic. But this is just a note to let you know that the investment permit, the golden visa, it's slightly different, and we will go and check on this later on in the presentation.
Yes. Thank you, Joanna. And also, I just wanted to mention that we have not addressed it here in the modalities of residence visa, but there is also new types of visa that were approved by the Portuguese government, but they are not entirely regulated. So we didn't put it here, but they exist already. Which are the digital nomads visa, which I think is something that will be very good for everyone that's already remote working in Portugal or that decides to come here to remote work. And also a job search visa, which is also very helpful for people that are coming here to look for a job and then and staying in the country. Just let you know that since this is being regulated, there are very, very few information on this, but they already exist. So these will be also following legal requirements foreseen by law. That will be also must be analyzed in a case-by-case basis. And as I was saying, the residence process. I already spoke a little bit about it during the presentation, but we have here the anagram of the entire residence process in a very simplistic way, but It has the main steps of the residence process. So as I explained, first you must get the residence visa, and then you'll be entitled to get the residence permit. The residence visa process begins with the applicant checking which type of modality of visa will be best suited for the intended purposes in the country. And once chosen, the applicant must make sure that all the legal requirements are fulfilled, and an analysis of the visa requirements must be made. This must be made in a case-by-case basis, because each type of visa has a different type of requirements that must be fulfilled. So it's only possible to do this once you have decided on the type of visa that you intend to apply for. All the requirements must be fulfilled before you schedule an appointment at the consulate or the outsourcing company or embassy to submit your application before them. This will be analyzed by the entity, the competent entity, which will be CEF, and CEF will decide if all the legal requirements are fulfilled or not, and if the request for a visa should be accepted or rejected. If the application is, of course, accepted, then you'll be granted the visa and you can come to Portugal, and you will have 4 months to apply for the residence permit. Usually, as I was saying before, the consulate where you make where you submit the application usually schedules the meeting with CEF automatically to get the residence permit. So usually this is very straightforward. You don't need to do it by yourself. The consulate would do it on your behalf. But it may not be so. And if so, you should, once you arrive to Portugal, you should make the scheduling yourself. So once this happens, you should submit again all the documentation. The documentation usually is more or less the same, so it's not very common that CEF do not accept the residence permit requests. But anyway, the process will be submitted to CEF, so the last word is theirs, and they will inform you in the end if it was granted or not. Usually the process of the residence permit will run in the CEF delegation of your area of residence in Portugal. So let's say that you provided proof of residence in, let's say, the Algarve in Lolé. You will be your meeting with CEF will be scheduled with the delegation competent for Lolé. So to make everything easier and to make sure that you don't have to move around the country a lot. Also the entry requirements and periods of stay are very important for third country nationals, because I also think that with the experience we have with clients, they are not very straightforward, and we would like to clarify this too. So for every third country nationals, usually they must have a visa to legally enter and stay in Portugal. This is the rule, and in order to stay in Portugal, you must have it. However, of course, and most of you may know, there are 2 exceptions. The golden visa, as Joanna also mentioned, the golden visa is called a golden visa, but it's actually a residence permit, and it grants their holders the possibility to have a residence permit without going through the normal process of residence. So you can apply directly to the residence permit without getting the visa first. So that's why this is one of the exceptions, because having the golden visa does not mean that you need to have a visa first. The second option will be the touristic and short stay visas for people that are from third countries exempted from visa. There is a huge list of countries that are exempted from visa for touristic purposes in Portugal. Some of them are the ones we mentioned here: UK, USA, the regions of Hong Kong and Macau are also exempted. Other countries like New Zealand, Canada, Israel, so are some of the countries that are also exempted from this this touristic visa. But this only means that you can only stay 90 days in the 190 days period and no more. So the exemption is right, it exists, but it's only for 90 days in 180 days periods. These for the entry requirements. Once you get the residence visa, as you see, you are resident in Portugal. So there are no limitations to the periods of staying in the country when having one. So if you are a residence permit holder, you can stay in the country for as long as you like, as long as the residence permit is valid and you comply with all the legal requirements associated with this. However, you must make sure that the maximum periods of absence from the country are not surpassed. And this is very important. For the temporary residence permits, which is the first type of residence that you will receive while living in the country, you can only stay out of the country for 6 consecutive months or 8 interpolated months during the total period of validity of the permit. As I mentioned, the period of validity of the permits will change from permit to permit, and therefore the calculation on how long you can stay out of the country will depend on this period of validity. And it can only be checked in a case-by-case basis. For the permanent residence permits, you can only stay for 24 consecutive months, or during a period of 3 years, 30 interpolated months out of the country. It seems a lot, but it will depend on the periods of validity. And this is very important that you keep these periods in mind, because if these are not complied with, CEF may cancel the residence permit and can ask you to leave the country and go back to your country of origin.
Sorry, just to add a little note in here, the permanent residence permit. So this is the one granted after the temporary residence permit. So you will always have to go through the temporary, maximum periods of absence and have your temporary residence permit before becoming a permanent resident here. Actually, this will cross with the periods that will also, as a legal resident in Portugal, will allow you to, after 5 going to 6 year, you can apply for Portuguese nationality if all the requirements for that purpose are met. And in this case, if you go through that route, you'll of course obtain a Portuguese passport, and you'll no longer be just a resident, you'll become a national. But for the permanent residence cards, these usually are granted for a period of 5 years. So instead of shorter periods of stay, that is why it is temporary. The permanent one, well, it is permanent, but it has a 5 years duration period as a rule. You can, and there are many people in the country who are have opted for renewing their permanent residence permits and do not apply for Portuguese nationality. But this is not mandatory, so then you have an alternative. I think this was just a note I wanted to mention before you go ahead, Sarah. Come on.
Thank you, Joanna. The only exception to this will be the golden visa, which is the residence permit Joanna already mentioned, and me too, because the golden visa does not foresee any maximum periods of absence from the country. It actually does the opposite. It mentions the minimum periods that you need to stay in the country for it to be the requirements to be fulfilled. So in the case of the golden visa, you should stay at least 7 days during the first year and 14 days on the following year. So instead of have the maximum periods of absence as minimum periods of stay. As I mentioned, if you surpass the maximum periods of absence, or if you don't comply with the minimum periods of stay, CEF may cancel the residence. As Chris mentioned, we will move just forward to the golden visa. And just to make a final note on the golden visa, to have some time, I hope, for your questions. Just to say that, as we mentioned, this is a residence permit and not a visa. This is a residence permit for investment purposes. So it's granted to third country nationals that intend to make business and invest in the country. This is not a normal or standard, as we say, residence permit. Has periods of validity that are different from the standard residence permit, but it has some main features that are actually benefits and are, let's say, better than the residence permit ones. One of them is the residence visa exemption, as we already spoke about, the short periods of stay in Portugal, freedom of movement within the Schengen area, which is also very important, right to family reunification, which is also a right that other types of visa have and other types of residence permits also have, and the right to apply for Portuguese nationality, of course, based on a case-by-case analysis. And the basis of the golden visa, as I was mentioning, is the investment in Portugal, and the types of investment that are most well known in the country and most tested are the ones we mentioned here in the presentation. So it's the transfer of capital of at least 1,500,000 euros, acquisition of real estate of at least 500,000 euros, capital transfer of at least 500,000 euros for the acquisition of units of investment funds or venture capitals funds focused on corporate capitalization. Of course, there are a lot other investments and many different types of investment, but we thought that these were as the most well-known and most well-tested in the country were the ones that were worth mentioning in the presentation. And also bear in mind that this type of visa, the amounts are all higher, and also the administrative fees are also higher than the normal and standard residence permit administrative fees. And I think that this is it. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening.
We're going to extend our time because obviously we won't have any time for questions otherwise. So we're gonna stay here for a little while. So we've got a few questions. The first one is so let's just focus on the D7 visa, because that's the one that most people who want to retire to Portugal will want to use. Firstly, I guess the big question is, if I'm buying a property there, can I buy a property with some expectation that I will get the D7 visa? Do most people get the visa? Is the question.
I can answer that one, Chris. It is one of the requirements to get a residence visa is really to prove accommodation in Portugal. In fact, that evidence of having accommodation in Portugal is much stronger, let's say this way, with a title deed of a property that is owned by the applicant. There are alternatives, of course, but from the moment you have a property in Portugal, that criteria shall be, undiscussed. You, of course, must bear in mind when you start the investment process and the purchase of the property in Portugal, you should not do things separately. If your plan is really to relocate to Portugal, then your lawyers should assist you doing both things and both assessments simultaneously. So you make sure that you start preparing your D7 application along with your purchase process, and you both will match and allow you a successful result at the end. So the property investment and the D7 visa with the residence permit.
And the minimum, we always talk about the minimum passive income that you need for the D7 visa. So roughly how much is that?
Sarah, do you want to explain that in more detail?
Yes.
The figures vary.
So the figures are not usually all the same for everyone. So it will depend on how many people are applying, but the idea is that the calculation will be made is calculated over 100% of the minimum wage amount in the country, which will change every year. So you must. When calculating it, your lawyer must be aware of which is the minimum amount to make this calculation. So it's 100% of the minimum wage amount multiplied by 12 months. So you must make sure that to the Portuguese authorities that you have enough money for 12 months. So this is usually the calculation that is made. Now, it will depend, of course, on how many people are applying and the amount of the minimum wage.
Oh, and the minimum wage at the moment is 705 euros per month. So you should multiply this by 12 for each adult, for the first applicant adult. Then there will be differences for the second if you are talking about a family reunification request joined with submitted along with the main application of the D7. And this amount is likely to increase in 2023. So there won't be much time left from now to apply this figure.
And will also depend if you're applying with a child or
yes,
children.
Exactly. Adults and
children, the amounts are different.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say that's not that dissimilar to a UK pension. So, but I haven't seen the exchange rate today, and it might have gone down so far today that it's less. But okay, well that's good news. I think most of our readers will be able to get past on that. A question from Amir on the golden visa, geographical constraints. And now I know there's been new rules saying you can't just go and buy a lovely property on the Algarve and think you'll get a golden visa anymore. So can you tell us a little bit more about those constraints?
Absolutely, Chris. So from January this year, the criteria for real estate investment that is eligible for golden visa applications changed. For habitational property, one can only apply using a property purchase of this kind if the property is located in the interior of the country, in the countryside of Portugal. This was because the price was increasing significantly in the big cities, and Portuguese families were struggling to afford buying property in Portugal, to live. So the government decided to do this amendment. There is an official list of explaining and detailing what is and what are the areas deemed as a countryside. So indeed, in the Algarve, although the Algarve is not the countryside, so all the coastal area of Portugal, from the Algarve, Alentejo, South, Lisbon, and Oporto, all the coastal area is no longer eligible for a habitational property investment. However, there are a few exceptions, and they will depend on some local parishes in each council that, because they are slightly in the countryside and not so overpopulated, the government still consider them eligible for golden visa. So I advise you before starting a property research to ask your solicitors, and some real estate agents also may assist you on this, but they come to us to double check if a property is eligible for golden visa, because as I said, it's very important that both processes are alongside, are prepared simultaneously. This is not applicable for non-housing properties, so commercial, also properties that are located in resorts. Although they can be used for accommodation and habitation in many cases, because many resorts all over the country allow their owners to stay and live in their units, in their apartments or villas, these properties, legally, they are licensed for tourism purposes, for services, because they are included in a hotel, in a resort facility, and they are also served with many common services typical of a hotel, of a touristic stay. So this opportunity has increasingly came, and appeared in the last months, especially in the Algarve, in Lisbon, in all the coastal area of Portugal, because it allows the best of both scenarios. Having your property in the coastal area, and still that is not licensed for habitation, but still it can be used for that purpose, and is also suitable for a golden visa application. This is a very interesting detail of the golden visa new rules.
Okay, fantastic. If and also if readers want to find those areas, they can look on the Portugal Property Guides website, and we have all those listed.
We can also send, in shared, Chris, if you want, by email, you can send that information and complete the presentation here if you want. Yeah.
Well, I just got one other question because it's quite an important one, and it's one that we always get asked. It'll be the last one, and that is, it's from Stephen, who has a Portuguese partner, and they're buying in Portugal. How does he get residence status?
Sarah.
Okay. So in this case, the process that is followed, it's more or less the same of the third country nationals. But in this case, there is a very important detail, which is the Portuguese partner. And the fact that having a Portuguese partner is important because you'll follow some kind of special family reunification process. So the right process is the family reunification one, but it will not exactly follow the same stages or steps than a normal reunification process. Of course, all the requirements that were mentioned and all the steps that were mentioned will be followed, but there are also some special and more steps that will facilitate the process because you have a Portuguese partner, and that should be in some way recognized. So the right process is the family reunification with special that of course when applying and asking your solicitor to help you, you should mention that you have a Portuguese partner, because this will make a difference on the type of process that is followed from that on.
Okay. Well, that really is all that we've got time for. So thank you both very, very much. Really helpful, really insightful, and really, really detailed. And of course, people can look again at the presentation, and they can look at the slides, and they can also contact you on those numbers and those emails, and ask you directly and engage your services when hopefully they do make that move. We do recommend that you get in touch with Matt Laws directly to discuss your requirements. Thank you for watching this session. We wish you all the very best in your move overseas. We've got tons more information on the Your Overseas Home website. And also, we're now looking forward in 6 weeks. 6 weeks to our virtual show, Your Overseas Home Virtual, which there should be a thing coming up on your screen where you can register. It's on a Saturday. It's all day. Just come and go, meet all the experts, attend webinars, look at thousands of properties, speak to currency people, get all the information you want, and then you'll be ready to go, frankly. Thank you again. Do register for Your Overseas Home Virtual, and happy property hunting. Thank you again to Sarah and Joanna.
Thank you, Chris.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Bye.